And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. By the mid-1800s, the world hunting fraternity learned that British Columbia harbored one of North America's most magnificent big game populations. Local hunters started guiding services to meet the demand for quality big game hunts. Guiding licenses were first issued in 1913, and guiding territories were established in the late 1940s. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1990.
Today, hunting guides have a $22 million annual income to protect, but the priority is protecting that wilderness resource for everyone's benefit. It's not all simple anymore, but changing world priorities mean you have to assess and allow for more than one use of the public resource.
Forest Minister Claude Richmond spoke to the Guides Convention and seemed to address the Guides' concerns.
We can no longer look at the forest and see only timber values. We cannot do that, nor will we do that. There are many other values in the forest besides timber. Watersheds, wildlife, fisheries, heritage, recreation, wilderness, to name a few. And we realize that there are...
The Forest Ministry buzzword for recognizing other values is integrated resource management. In production of their video, the Guides turned to Professor Emeritus of Resource Planning of UBC, Irving Fox.
Integrated management is given lip service in British Columbia, but in my judgment, it is not implemented in a systematic fashion. What is generally done in British Columbia, in the case of forestry, for example, is to measure, to look at the potential for timber harvesting, and then make some fringe adjustments in order to make some accommodation to other uses. This does not assure that one realizes maximum benefits from the forest land base.
Simply put, the province's forests belong to the people, and those charged with regulating resource use must do so with an eye toward the best overall return to the people. Our government agencies haven't done too well at reaching multiple use balance. A railroad for resource extraction is pounded through a world-class wilderness, never reaching its goal, but fouling wildlife and recreational benefits in the vain attempt. Who benefits? Who pays? Old footage tells an old story, the lessons of which we have yet to learn, even though they are etched all too permanently across the face of the one resource British Columbia is already world famous for, our unique natural wilderness. Southern and coastal planners often do not understand the North. Yes, it is big, but it is also very frail. You cannot hide the scars of mineral exploration, and the nature of northern climates means these tears in the earth do not heal, but decades later are still raw, growing nothing but bigger as erosion adds its impact. Possibly big but short-term extraction values must be measured against the enduring loss of scenic, recreation, wildlife, and wilderness potentials that can produce increasing value over an unlimited span of years.
An activity that is foreclosed by the activity being analyzed is a cost to the project.
The Northwest Guide outfitters want to see forest land subjected to a cost-benefit analysis before being designated for any use.
Each potential use of the resource must be evaluated before one begins to make the plan. Once they've each been evaluated, then the analyst endeavors to fit them together in a way that will produce the greatest benefits, the greatest net benefits to society.
Rick Careless is the executive director of the Wilderness Tourism Council of BC. He works on projects throughout the province that bring him into contact with the Forest Ministry in an effort to have special lands set aside. He concurs that a cost-benefit analysis could be used to determine the best use for a piece of forested land.
Benefit cost analysis has been a typical way of doing resource planning in the United States for about 30 years. And yeah, what it does is it gets us to realize that other uses are terribly valuable. You know, we didn't used to even notice that there was a tourism resource or a recreation resource here until we started cutting down the trees and realized what we lost. Now, we're not interested in shutting down forestry or shutting down other uses. We're interested in getting the best mix on the land base, and that requires some means of measuring. Benefit cost does that.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thanks for staying with us. About 89% of Canada's land area is Crown land, 41% is federal Crown land, and 48% is provincial Crown land. The remaining 11% is privately owned. Let us return to the archives to discover the balance of industry on Crown land.
The big trend hitting British Columbia right now is share the forest, and I completely believe in share the forest. It's about time. We are asking for 2.5% of the land base in British Columbia be protected for our industry. That's the share that we're asking for. The forest industry has had something like 95%. We're really glad they're using that. We want them to recognize we are the #2 industry, tourism is, and the #1 employer, 100,000 people full-time in tourism. We've got to have a place too. So let's get mature about this. Let's really get planning it properly and recognize all the players around the table, especially that tourism is here to stay.
Now there's a key to this argument: tourism. It's BC's #2 industry, but it's got a long way to go to catch up to the value of #1, the forest industry.
Forestry is still far and away the #1 industry in the province, lest we ever forget that. The others are very important, but they're a long way back in second place. Tourism, which is again very dear to my heart, and I love the tourism industry, is probably in second place about now, edging out mining, but it's back at about the $3 billion mark. Forestry is somewhere between $13 and $15 billion.
But the counter to that seems to be if the forest industry is allowed to continue unchecked in BC, cutting timber in what were once remote, wild areas, will tourism ever reach its potential? By the time the tourism industry grows up, its territory might be all gone.
Some aesthetic values can be quantified. The 255 active guide outfitters who bring over $22 million in direct industry revenue to this province each year can point to current figures. In a province where tourism is ranked as the second largest industry, guide outfitter clients spend more per day than almost any other tourist group. Most of that money stays here, and the multiplier effect nearly doubles the 22 million. The aesthetics of wilderness experience rank high on the client list of reasons for spending their money here. Tourism is the fastest growing BC industry. In a world where adventure travel is increasing rapidly in popularity, this province is well positioned by its reputation to cash in on that growth, but only if we protect, through planning, the natural attractions the world expects of beautiful BC. We have not been doing that. Our #1 industry, logging, and #2, tourism, are presently in total competition, often to the detriment of both. Each identifies only with its primary user group and makes only subsidiary accommodation for other interest groups affected. When logging was undisputed king and the forests went on forever, the tone was set. Where is the immediate big dollar return? But now we're running out of wood. Now, in many cases, tourism and forestry are fighting over marginal timber, and when that's gone, everybody's out of business.
Various sectors in the tourist industry, including the guides, are realizing that they are important to BC's economy.
The tourism industry has typically been fragmented with lots of little individual operators, and they haven't seen how they could get together and really make their case effectively. So I think it's just dawning on them, and I think they now are starting to realize they are part of this province's #2 industry.
So even though at the Guides Convention, various sides all seemed to sing the same song, share the land, recognize the different users of BC's vast lands, the proof, as they say, will be in the pudding. Grant Hazelwood of the BC Wildlife Federation, in a somber address to the Guides, quietly stressed the urgency of the ongoing debates about wilderness. It won't, after all, grow back if we use it all up.
But wilderness values are not free. Its value ties in the truism of how much people are willing to give up or forego in order to retain its availability in the finite world. Our focus must be on protecting, maintaining, and appreciating our ever-diminishing wilderness. The price of regeneration for this finite resource will be too high for society to afford in tomorrow's world.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The BC Forest Branch, now Service, was created in February 1912, but research activities did not begin until 1921, when James Alexander studied lumber utilization, logging/disposal, natural regeneration, tree growth and yield, and fire protection. Let us return to the archives as Bruce McClellan shares about his study on grizzly bears.
The Ministry of Forests is attempting to address concerns voiced by groups like the Guide Outfitters. Bruce McClellan is a biologist who spent the last 12 years studying grizzly bears in the Flathead River area in the southeast corner of BC. Since January 1st of this year, however, he's moved to Red Rock, just south of Prince George. He's now employed by the Forest Ministry to conduct research for them.
Right now, my job is to determine which of the issues that are most critical, the relationship between wildlife and forestry, that require research to solve the problems that are there.
The hiring of someone like McClellan by the Forest Service is good news to the Guides. His work on grizzlies in the Flathead region is well known and respected.
I imagine what the purpose is that there's an awful lot of forests being developed in northern BC. I think there's more hectares of trees being logged in the northern two forest regions than anywhere else in the province. And there's very little known on the relationship between forest management and most of the wildlife species up here. And so if we're going to manage for integration, we will have to know more about the relationship.
In the north, two important species in McClellan's research are caribou and grizzly bears. Do you think that you can have logging development and still maintain high populations of caribou and grizzly bears?
I don't know about caribou, because I've never worked with caribou, but I have worked with grizzly bears for 12 years in an area where we have had a lot of timber management and a lot of oil and gas exploration and no human settlement. The grizzly bear population is very dense there. There's lots of bears. They're doing well. They're going uphill fast. The logging was done very well. Not all of it. There was actually some pretty sad displays of logging, but generally it was done fairly well. So it is possible. But the logging has to be done well and the access has to be managed after. You can't have lots of roads open and people settling after it.
So access is going to be a key issue then, especially the group of people you were talking to today when you're talking about guide outfitters who are also wilderness dependent. When you get developers wanting to open up areas for logging, you somehow have to convince them that they can't really open it up, that it has to be controlled.
Yeah, access is for grizzly bears will be the main issue, I'm convinced. That's what I've found in the Flathead, and people have found that wherever they look at bears, the access is the major problem in the long run. And development requires access, however, access can be managed. And it's more to convince the public that access management is useful. A lot of people just want access. They want roads into every drainage because it permits them to get in there easily. They may not realize that the roads are actually ruining the reason they want to get there in the long run. So we have to convince people that some access is fine, but we have to control a lot of it.
So questions of access and whether wildlife and forest development can coexist are being tackled by the Forest Ministry. Nevertheless, the guides intend to keep up the pressure on the ministry to properly assess all values in the forest. Keith Connors is chairman of the Education Committee for the Guides and Outfitters Association of BC. He says the guides are working with other so-called environmental groups to try to preserve some of BC's wilderness.
The concerns we have and the likenesses that we have in terms of what we're trying to achieve can draw us together. You know, there's definitely some very strong differences in there, but we have in some cases been able to shove those to the side to work towards kind of a common goal. And I think between the Guide Outfitters Association of BC, the BC Wildlife Federation, the Federation of BC Naturalists, and some other key groups like that will be working more closely together. I've seen signs of it already. The Western Canada Wilderness Committee is working with some of our members in trying to protect and preserve some areas. So the fact that they may not believe that an animal should be used for consumptive purpose is different than our views, obviously, and they have been willing to put that on the back seat, kind of to concentrate on the more immediate issue of trying to save it, and make sure it's saved, and then divvy it up later.
World tourism has made it known they won't sail a clear-cut inside passage. Adventure tours aren't interested in visiting clear-cuts. And with uncontrolled local road access, it's not long before the wildlife no longer exists to be viewed, photographed, or hunted by visitor or resident.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
As the government-appointed guardians of British Columbia's environment, the Conservation Officer Service is a highly skilled and dedicated workforce that is currently responsible for over 20 provincial and federal environmental statutes. In this final segment of Open Connection, we follow Keith Rand as he goes about his duties.
On the final weekend of deer season, Rand is busy with roadside spot checks. He's looking for hunting violators or poachers.
How'd you make out? Any luck?
Just going to see nothing yet.
Nothing yet, eh?
No.
I'm just going to check your firearms, please. Just check to make sure it's stored safely here and that the action is empty. Howdy. Hi. Well, I'd like to check your hunting license, please, sir. Okay, so you're from where?
Wilson.
You had any luck this year yet?
No.
Okay, how many other firearms have you got? Thank you. Okay, it's empty. How much have you fellas had to drink? Since when?
Since this morning.
Okay, I'd like to see that put away.
Rand is one of only 120 conservation officers in the province. That means each officer has thousands of acres to patrol. Catching a poacher is a game of chance. It takes luck and a lot of patience.
One pickup came down the road, and as soon as the occupants saw the flashing lights, they ran the roadblock. The vehicle they were following got a short distance ahead, but they did see them stop and throw an object out of the truck, and then they caught up. So then we got them pulled over. They almost had to drive them into the ditch to get them pulled over. And the 3 occupants were arrested right on the scene because they went back and they found the animal, or the object they tossed out of the vehicle was a doe deer out of season.
On this day, there are no charges laid. We encounter just a large number of hunters looking for sport. A lucky few are successful.
Anybody else have any luck up on the hill today?
Oh, we heard some shots.
We heard some shooting earlier.
Officers say most hunters play by the rules, and they have a lot of contempt for poachers.
Hunters don't have that much of a good name because the majority of people are against them.
That's right.
So if I see anything done which shouldn't be done, I'll report it.
Deer poaching is a problem in the Chilliwack area, not only during the day, but also at night. So conservation officers have started using a special decoy program aimed at catching night poachers. But since the program is relatively new, local officers didn't want to show us how it worked. So we spent some time across the border with Washington wildlife agents who helped design the program.
Several miles up a back road near Mount Baker, Bob Ford carefully hides his vehicle under tarps and bushes before starting another night's surveillance. Across the road and set back amongst the scrub is this decoy, a buck's head with reflective eyes mounted on a special apparatus designed to trick hunters into believing it's real.
Game 139, game 69.
And down the road, Ford's partner Gary Stendel also lies in wait.
It's against the law to hunt deer, elk, or big game animals with an artificial light. And in order for us to be able to say without any doubt that that's what someone was doing, we have to allow them to destroy the animal. And so this allows us to show intent without destroying an animal.
There are no violators tonight, so the wildlife agents demonstrate how the decoy is used. Out of the blackness, a vehicle is seen pit lamping.
They'll catch the eyes of the animal, and the animal will usually just stand and stare back at the light, giving the individuals time to get out and shoot, and sometimes they just shoot right from their vehicle.
Pit lamping NBC and other offenses under the Wildlife Act can result in the loss of hunting permits for up to 5 years, a $10,000 fine, or 6 months in jail. Deer are sometimes poached for their velvet antlers, but more often simply for their meat, and it's illegal to sell wild game meat. But here at the Boundary Bay Farm in Delta, deer are raised legally for meat. That's because these are fallow deer. They aren't native to Canada.
These deer have been imported from New Zealand. They're fenced in on farm, so you will not find them in the wild. They're not an indigenous animal to British Columbia.
Deer farming is a new industry in BC. Most of the province's 50 farms are less than 2 years old. The venison is sold to several white tablecloth restaurants around the city and is carried in a few specialty meat stores. Farmers say game farming is the way of the future.
I think this takes some of the pressure off our wildlife species, because you don't have to go up north and spend thousands of dollars to go hunt. You can go to your butcher's shop or your restaurant and have your wild venison.
One of the ways we're pushing against the poaching is to have an electronic implant, a computer chip planted right under the skin of each animal, so that there's no way it can be tampered with, and we know where that animal came from, its breeding history, who sold it, at what date, and this way we can control the poaching.
But the BC Wildlife Federation, a 40,000-member strong group of hunters and sportsmen, fear game farming will crack the poaching business wide open.
You create a legitimate market that then is open for the poachers, and then you have, again, when you've only got one CO for every 2 million square miles, who's going to enforce these, the game farm, or the game farm laws, or the regulations that control it? Anytime you legitimize a market for wildlife, we're in trouble.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.